Over the last few years, large language models like ChatGPT have made huge waves in the programming and data analysis space. Increasingly, your productivity as a programmer and data analyst will depend on how well you're able to use and integrate AI tools into your workflow. However, as a beginner programmer, it's important to make sure that AI is not getting in the way of your learning. It's important that you are building skills of your own. In this video, we're going to look at some basic principles and guidelines for using AI tools in your work. Let's get started. So let's start with a simple question. Should you use AI tools in this course? And the answer to this is an enthusiastic yes. So if you want, you can turn off the video now. No, but you should stay a bit longer because it's important that you are careful that using AI does not get in the way of your learning, that it does not become a crutch this early in your programming career. And the reason why you need to make sure that large language models like ChatGPT don't become a crutch during your learning process is because LLMs really are a useful tool, but you need to learn the terrain in order to navigate the landscape of programming and data analysis correctly. And these two pictures, which incidentally I created with an AI model, are an analogy for how I think you should view AI models as a help during your programming. So AI can help you get up to baseline very quickly. And one of the main reasons for this is because you don't have to spend hours getting stuck on easy bugs as programmers are wont to do, especially when you are beginning programming. So at the beginning of your programming career, AI tools like ChatGPT are going to be super useful for you for debugging and for getting you quickly up to speed. But then once you've become competent as a programmer and data analyst, and you're trying to ascend to new heights, you're trying to hike new terrain, at that point AI is a little bit less helpful. It is still helpful as a kind of eager sidekick or an eager intern, but you need to have the expertise to direct, to lead, and to supervise the model. So at that stage, I imagine the model like this. It's an eager sidekick. It has this chainsaw that it's using to help you carve a path through the terrain. But you need to be the mountaineer. You need to tell it where exactly you need to go. You need to translate the business problems or the health problems or the domain problems into data questions. So it's important that as you are learning programming and data science, even though you are using tools like ChatGPT, you should be making sure you're understanding the code, understanding the terrain, so that you can leverage these AI systems effectively and guide them in the correct directions. And here's another analogy that I think may help to frame how you should think about these AI tools. Here I ask the question, should children still learn how to do arithmetic? So of course you remember the days of elementary school or secondary school where you had to learn all these arithmetic rules. You had to learn your multiplication table, your division table. But when you were learning all those things, or certainly when I was learning all those things, we had calculators that could do most of that work. And indeed we have computers that can also do most of that work. So one may ask, is there really a point to kids learning how to do basic arithmetic if we have computers and calculators that can do most of that work for us? But the problem is, if you skip this step, then you may not build the crucial mathematical intuitions and foundations that are the basis for much more complex math later on. What I'm saying is, if you never learn basic mathematics, chances that you're going to be the next Einstein and help us figure out the next important laws of physics are very slim. Most fields of thought are very cumulative, and if you don't have the base, you can't really push on the frontier. So similarly, when you are learning programming, even though ChatGPT can probably answer most of your beginner coding questions, that doesn't mean that it's not worth learning, because if you don't build this core foundation, then you're not going to be able to build complex software, you're not going to be able to build complex data pipelines, you're not going to be able to do important data science work at the frontier. So now, given all of that background, what tools do we actually recommend that you use while you're learning? At the moment, I think of three main ways that programmers and data analysts are using AI tools. One of those is as a kind of autocomplete. So this is best typified by something like GitHub Copilot. Here's an example. Here I'm writing the piece of code age equals 50, and then I just have to put in comments age and months, and GitHub Copilot guesses the next code that I want to write. So it's auto-completing my code for me. Then, of course, you have the chat model where you ask questions to a model like ChatGPT, or Codium, which you can use directly in VS Code. We'll show you how to do that. And you get answers to your questions. And a more up-and-coming approach is here, where you can just give instructions to a coding agent and it goes ahead and implements a bunch of files and makes adjustments in those files, as you can see in this example. So once you feel like you're becoming a competent programmer, I feel like you should go ahead and use all of these. But during this learning stage, the main tool I will recommend is just a chat interface. I recommend you turn off autocomplete, especially if this is your first programming language, so you can get a good intuition for programming syntax. And probably at this stage, most of your projects are not going to be complex enough to require this kind of coding agent. So we're going to focus on using chat tools as a guide to programming. And let's think about some of the ways that you can use ChatGPT in particular for now as a programming learner. The first one is for code explanations and clarifications. And I'll jump over to ChatGPT and give a quick example of what I mean by this. So here's an example piece of code from one of the introductory lessons for this course. And let's imagine that I don't quite understand what's happening here. I could just go ahead and copy this code. I can paste it into ChatGPT, and then I press Shift Enter. And I can just say, please explain what's going on in this code. And maybe from reading the explanation, I don't quite understand what a dictionary is. Here it says the curly braces inside define a dictionary. I could copy that and say, I don't understand this part. I don't understand this part. Give me a step-by-step tutorial to help me understand what dictionaries are. And it'll go ahead and give you a long step-by-step walkthrough on this. And as it's doing that, I'd recommend that you copy the code and run it in your own coding environment so you can really understand what's going on. Now, another thing to mention that's relevant to getting explanations is that you can actually upload pictures on here. So let me open up a new chat, and I'm going to actually upload a picture of that same piece of code. So I took a screenshot of the code, and I'm going to ask, I don't understand what's going on. Please explain. Please explain this code. And this is important because most of our content is in the form of videos. And so it's helpful if you can just provide screenshots to the model. And indeed, the model understands most screenshots. So you can see it's able to parse the text from that screenshot and explain what's going on. So those are some tips on getting code explanations and code clarifications from ChatGPT. Next, let's think about code generation. And here's where I think you should be careful, because you want to make sure that you understand whatever code you copy from ChatGPT so that you are actually building skills and building expertise as well. One area where code generation gets very helpful is for plotting code. This is because the code for visualization libraries in Python and most other programming languages tends to be very complicated. There are many different functions and arguments, and keeping track of all of them is impossible for most people. So this is a good use case for AI models because you don't have to remember all these tiny little details. So let's see an example. Here on a Google Colab notebook, I've gone ahead and imported this Kali data, which is built into the Google Colab sample data environment. So I'm going to import that, and let's look at that Kali data. This is California housing data by longitude and latitude. And let's imagine I wanted to make a scatter plot of median income versus median household value. I could just copy the head of this code, copy the top, let's say 5 lines or 5 rows, and I take that over to ChatGPT, and I would say consider the data below, and I'll say, how do I make a scatter plot of housing? What do we say? We said income versus house value, of income versus house value, and I can say with the Plotly library, or Plotly Express library. As it's giving me these answers, you can kind of get a sense of why it's important to understand the code that you're copying, because if I copy this full piece of code, it's not going to be correct for my example. I need to know the right thing to copy. In that case, I'll copy just from here. Okay, so I've copied that to my clipboard, and let's go back and try to make a plot of that. I'm going to make a new code cell. I'll paste that in, and I need to change the df here from DF to Cali. I also need to import Plotly Express. So let's do that over at the top maybe. Import plotly.express as px, and I can run that. And now if I go back down here, I should be able to plot this chart. And so now I can see that as the income goes up, the house value also goes up. If I wanted, I could ask some follow-up questions to the model. I could take screenshots of this plot and share that with the model so it understands what has been plotted. Another thing that I could do is I could get the help for this function, the px.scatter function. Let me quickly show you how to do that. I could get the help for this function with px.scatter question mark, and I could paste this into the model so that it has the most up-to-date information on how this function works. So AI models are helpful in that case. Now for our last example of how you might want to use ChatGPT, it's amazing for debugging assistance, but importantly, when you're trying to get debugging help from ChatGPT, you must share a few things. You must share the relevant data that you are working with, a minimal code example, the expected output, and the error or issue that you are facing. Okay, so these are essentials for anyone, including ChatGPT, to understand the problem that you are having. Let's give a quick example of what I mean. So this is a bit of a silly example, but it serves to demonstrate some key principles. So what we're trying to do with this set of code over here is we're creating a list of weights, 13, 23, 32, and 41. So I can run this code to create that list of weights. And if I wanted, I could also print that list of weights just to see what that looks like there. Then I'm trying to calculate the average weight, and I'm choosing to do that by first counting how many individuals there are here with len of weights. And so if I run that, this seems to run fine. And I can check the count variable, and I see that is correctly counted as 4. And now on this next line, I'm trying to take the sum of the weights so that I can divide that by the count and get the average. But if I run this, I'm going to get an error. Now, ChatGPT is great for debugging, but you have to be smart about how you are giving it your code to be debugged. Here's one way that's not smart. I could just take this single line of code, and I could take that to ChatGPT and say, this code is giving me an error. And I paste in the code. Now this is not going to give me any good answer. Now I've given ChatGPT very little information, so it's just guessing a number of different things that could be the issue. It has listed a total of 3 or maybe 4 different problems. And very helpfully it says at the end, could you share more details about the error message so I can pinpoint the exact issue? So even ChatGPT notices that this is a bad way to ask for help on an error. So in order to improve the quality of this question that we're asking, we want to go back to these 4 things. We want to make sure that we've given the relevant data, a minimal code example, expected output, and the specific error or the issue. Okay, so let's start first with the data. So let's think about what is the data that is going into this line. It's of course this weights variable here. So we want to make sure that we give that to the model. So I'm going to copy that for now, and I'll just put it in a ChatGPT window. Then we want to give a minimal code example. This code is pretty minimal, so that's okay. I'll just copy that. An important thing about this code is that it's self-contained. So here we create the variable weights, and we use weights here. And everything else here is kind of built into Python. So sum is built into Python, and total is a variable that we create within this piece. So all of this is self-contained. Or in formal programmer terms, you may say it's reproducible. We should also add the expected output. So let's type something about that. We could say I was expecting to get the total or the sum of the weights into the total variable. And then the last thing we need is an error message. So let's copy that error message and paste that in. Now let's give all of the description. We can say here is the code I ran, and then we've defined the weights variable, total. I was expecting to get the sum of the weights into the total variable, but I got this error instead. So now we've given the 4 key elements, and a final thing I like to add is short and simple answer please, so that it doesn't write too much. And let's see what it says. It says the error occurs because the elements in the wait list are strings, not integers. You need to convert them to integers first. Okay, and so now we can copy this code here for the total, and we can paste that in here. We convert these strings here into numbers before we can use a sum. So let's try that, and now that seems to run, and now we can calculate our average. Now, of course, in theory, in this case, you could just delete the quotation marks from here and turn them into integers that way. But ChatGPT is being intelligent and assuming that there's some reason why these are originally in strings. There's a lot more to say about AI and programming and data science, but we'll try to keep this short. As we move through the course, we'll keep introducing principles and guidelines for working with these models. But like I said in the beginning, these are amazing tools, and you should try to take advantage of them as much as possible. For now, I'll say bye-bye, and I'll see you in the next video.